Yuki Tsunoda's 2023 season has just been completely flipped on its head. This season has seen him finally step out of Pierre Gasly's shadow and emerge as the number one at AlphaTauri, comprehensively beating Nyck De Vries, and just as it was all looking good, a massive challenge now faces the Japanese driver, as the battle with Daniel Ricciardo will be career-defining. It's now or never for Yuki Tsunoda. Let's look at the pathway of Tsunoda so far. Coming into Formula 1 in 2021, as the entire sport is on the precipice of a dramatic change into 2022, and alongside an established Pierre Gasly, who showed his quality consistently that season, meant that the 2021 season for Yuki was as much of a free hit as you can get in Formula 1. Don't get me wrong, he definitely tested the patience of the Red Bull team throughout the season, crunching the barriers in Imola, and Paul Ricard, and again in Baku. Wasn't the best way to settle into a new team, and neither was his reaction. He tended to boil over on the radio, often blaming the team for his lack of pace. But luckily for him, the Honda engine in the main Red Bull team was guiding Max Verstappen to his first ever World Championship win. So although Honda were technically leaving Formula 1 at the end of the season, the Japanese Honda-backed driver had a little more wiggle room during his rookie season, as the Honda team would have backed their driver and looked to keep him in that AlphaTauri seat despite his difficult season. Along with that though, Yuki was actually willing to adapt and change his lifestyle to improve. He often talked about the hate of training and difficulty motivating himself off of the track to come away from playing video games and instead work on his fitness or his racecraft. But it was clear his season began to improve later on in that year, with guidance from Alex Albon, along with his move to Italy and a new personal trainer to kind of point him in the right direction. This actually led to his best finish of 4th in Abu Dhabi at the season finale in 2021, which for some reason the media weren't really talking about. Maybe there was another talking point that was slightly more interesting, but I can't really remember. With his rookie season completed and a full winter break with a team that he'd settled into, the 2022 season showed clear progression for Yuki. He started the season incredibly well and looked to be a completely different driver than the one he was in 2021. The errors were still there, yes. It was clear that he was still one of the youngest drivers in the field. Like, the one that sticks in my head is obviously the spin exiting the pits in Canada. That was a little bit embarrassing, but in a tough season for AlphaTauri, Tsunoda had managed to match and beat his teammate more consistently than he did in his rookie year. For me, Yuki Tsunoda showed that he's capable of great racing when everything's right, and when the puzzle pieces fall into place, he is getting faster. So when his much more experienced teammate Pierre Gasly was leaving the team for Alpine in 2023, it opened the door for Yuki to grab that number one slot with both hands. I know it's easy to say after 10 races that Nyck De Vries has been nowhere near good enough, but before the season started, many were very optimistic of what Nyck could achieve, with a lot of people predicting that even though Nyck was a rookie, he would outperform and outscore Yuki Tsunoda throughout the 2023 season. There was a lot of pressure on Yuki. If a Formula 2 and Formula E champion comes into your team, that's a challenge. And you have to hand it to Yuki. He has massively stepped up, and especially in the first 5 races this season, where the AlphaTauri looked a little bit more competitive before everyone else made steps forwards where they really haven't, Tsunoda was consistently hovering in and around the points finishing positions. Either 10th or 11th place was guaranteed to be Tsunoda. And since then, unfortunately for him, there's been quite a few wet weekends, and it seems when the temperature drops, the AlphaTauri's pace seems to fall off a cliff too, so you can't really blame him for poor performances since then. You could even argue that Tsunoda being so good at the start of the season has actually made the rest of the season much harder. Tsunoda cemented his place as AlphaTauri's lead driver, with the combination of Nyck De Vries not performing as well as he could, alongside the fact that Tsunoda has definitely upped his game. Nyck De Vries has been replaced just 10 races into a 22 race season, meaning that Daniel Ricciardo will now come in, taking that sister AlphaTauri seat for the remaining 12 races. Ricciardo coming into the team means a completely different benchmark for Tsunoda. Alright, Danny Ric didn't have the best of times over the last couple of seasons with McLaren, but before that, Daniel Ricciardo was one of the most highly rated drivers on the grid, and he hasn't had easy teammates. He overcame 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel at Red Bull. Obviously, Vettel then moved on to Ferrari. He battled valiantly against a young Max Verstappen, and had he stayed at Red Bull, that battle would have been vicious, but instead he moved and dominated 2 very well-established drivers in Nico Hülkenberg and Esteban Ocon at Renault, who are 2 drivers that are still amongst the better drivers on the grid right now. And that's where it gets even more interesting, because Daniel Ricciardo making this mid-season return means that he has another new teammate battle ahead of him. But whilst Ricciardo's other teammates have been able to stick around on the grid, this partnership might mean the end is nearing for Yuki Tsunoda. Unlike Nyck, I can't see Daniel Ricciardo getting nowhere near Tsunoda. I think that Daniel will actually be right on the level as soon as he gets behind the wheel, which means that Yuki Tsunoda has to step up his level once again if he's to overcome the Australian. What this means is that these 12 races will be huge for Tsunoda's reputation. lose to Ricciardo, and all the good work that Yuki has done in the last 3 years in Formula 1 starts to unravel, and the chance of progressing into that Red Bull team looks unlikely. However, beating Daniel Ricciardo shows that Yuki is the real deal and can beat an 8-time Grand Prix winner, showing that he is making progress in his performance levels and that he could be the next number 2 at Red Bull. However, these 12 races are also huge for Daniel Ricciardo's reputation. Lose to Tsunoda and the failings at McLaren are compounded, confining him to this narrative that he's no longer the driver that he once was. Beat Tsunoda and nab some results, that really motivates the team to seriously look at Daniel Ricciardo as an option to build around for the future, with the possibility of his Red Bull career coming full circle and once again letting him step up into that top team. Both drivers, although they're at very different points in their career, are both at a fork in the road, and the rest of the 2023 season will define their careers. For me, it's last man standing at AlphaTauri. Win, you have a shot at the best seat on the grid. Lose, and it's basically all over. I'd love to know who you think is going to come out on top in the comments down below. Who are you backing for the rest of the season? Daniel Ricciardo or Yuki Tsunoda? Or is it going to be the slightest margin between them? And if you want to know more about the Daniel Ricciardo return, I made this video earlier on in the week, so click that link and I'll see you over.